So my name is Jessica Swartz. I am running for the 41st District State House office here. So this is to represent Kalamazoo and a little bit of the surrounding area in Lansing. I am running because I've just always been called to public service. Backing up a little bit, born and raised in Grand Rapids, to a public school teacher and a small business owner. I went to Michigan State, where I was on the Division I rowing team. And when I wasn't practicing or studying, I was picking up shifts at the local cafeteria, the school cafeteria or the local restaurants. And like I said, I've been called to this. One of my first experiences in what I call, the big leagues is my third year of law school. I got to work for Senator Levin on the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations in DC, and there we were investigating Enron at the time. So really got to get in there, got to see how it's done, the nuts and bolts of doing a congressional hearing, and committee work on the Hill, which also happens in Lansing. Yeah, what else? I'm trying to think of what else can I do. So I was, after that, I became an appellate attorney for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. And my role there was to help the courts understand and learn the laws and regulations as they apply to veterans benefits. And one of the things that I learned while I was doing that was quite often the holes that you find in statutes, the things that just don't quite make sense, it's because that the people who are writing them have never actually had to help people comply with the law. The day-to-day, what do I do with this law? And I think that's a really important lesson and one that I've been able to take to my clients after that. So I'm really excited to get started. That is a very legitimate concern and one that I share. So, just to kind of give a little bit of my background on this, I was the FOIA officer at WMU, so I'm very familiar with the FOIA rules, the FOIA laws, and how they apply specifically to the state of Michigan. And I think it's ridiculous that our legislature is not subject to those. So that would be the first one for me, is to make sure to open that up. And then the way my standard decision making always is to gather as many different perspectives as I can, different points of view, get all the facts, really understand how a decision that I make will affect folks in the future. And so that's what I will do, is I will gather not only the experts in any particular area, but also the citizens, and really get their perspectives. And so through those conversations and those meetings, you'll be able to see what legislation we're working on, where we're going with it, which way it's kind of leaning or not leaning. In addition to the standard, office hours. Julie Rogers currently does a coffee hour. I would continue doing that. We've got the district office here in Kalamazoo. Certainly keep that open. Town halls, all the usual stuff. But in addition, really trying to get to the meat of the issue, the heart of the issue, to understand it before making a decision. That's a really good question, and it relates to the transparency that we were just talking about. One of the big problems that we have discovered, and I really learned firsthand when I was running for Congress, is there's too much money in politics. Too many groups are allowed to just spend the money, and the legislators can take the money and spend it without any disclosure requirements. I'm sure there's technological ways we can do that. Having read the tax code and tried to learn how to follow the tax code, it's impossible. So any way that we can find to simplify that for the taxpayers, let them understand it's their right, it's their money, my money, we should be able to know how it's being spent. That's the job. The job is being accountable to the voters. Ultimately, the voters decide whether they believe you are working in their best interest or not. And transparency, again, relates back to accountability. I believe we should all be held accountable. And one of the things I would like to do when I get to Lansing that we've seen a lot of are corporations and stuff taking advantage of tax breaks that we have here that we've given. And then they cut out on us and are never held accountable. They get these tax breaks, the money's being taken away from the taxpayers, and then they just leave us without the benefit of that. So we need to hold folks accountable who are taking our tax our tax breaks. Similar accountability comes to environmental issues. Representative Rogers, again, has done a good work and working on cleaning up our brownfields around here, which are where the factories, dry cleaners, gas stations used to be. We need to hold those old corporations accountable for the chemicals that they've dumped into our ground, the environmental impacts that they've had. And with one-on-one conversations in coffee hours and those sorts of things, I would ask not only the voters, but also my staff to hold me accountable to what I said I was going to do. Yeah, I mean, we've heard that of all the doors that we've knocked so far, all of the places I've been, housing is one of the top 3 for pretty much everybody, and that crosses the political spectrum. So it is obviously something we have to certainly work on. The community has done a good job so far in terms of opening lower or housing for lower and middle income people. But to solve this problem, it's got to be multifaceted. Just opening some places isn't going to work. Just giving tax breaks isn't going to work. We need to do a lot of different things. So, one of them, continue what the city and the county have been doing in finding transitional housing, finding low income, middle income housing. You can't expect somebody just who's been on the streets to automatically go into a home and know how to function in that capacity. So the transitional housing that we've gotten so far is very, very important. Other things that we need to do is we need to hold landlords accountable for charging exorbitant rent and not taking care of the places, for kicking people out just so that they can raise rents. I mean, I think we can get some transparency and some accountability in there. Other ways that we can do this is to look at finding more incentives for builders and developers to build the multifamily homes, the smaller homes, those sorts of things, so that they can actually also benefit from that. And then finally, the work in cleaning up the brownfields, like I was mentioning before. If we can clean up that space, we can make it usable, and we can make it usable to build more housing. Our public safety is very, very important. I am a big supporter of public safety. I always have been. Having lived in quite a few different communities across the country, I can say that here in Kalamazoo, our public safety is outstanding in terms of their accountability and their transparency. That being said, like everywhere, there's always room for improvement. I think something that we learned in 2020 from the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others is that as a society, we're expecting our public safety officers to also be mental health professionals. And that's not fair both to the people they interact with and with the officers and our public safety professionals, because that's not what they train for. One of the things that Kalamazoo does that I think is wonderful, and my priest actually participates in it, is the Pastors on Patrol. And so we are able here in the community, every weekend, there is one of our faith leaders rides with public safety, and if it's a situation where it's safe for them to get out and try to mediate the situation so that it doesn't escalate to the level where we need public safety to get involved. That to me is the best of both worlds, the way to really do it. It allows public safety to focus on the dangerous crimes that we need help with, and we've hired them and they've trained to do, but it also keeps situations from escalating when they might not otherwise. Yeah, it's expensive. I mean, it's costs me more than $20 to get 2 subs and 2 pops at Jimmy John's while I'm taking my daughter from swim practice to whatever the next thing is that we have to go to. And that's just not feasible. You know, things like gas and inflation and things at the federal level, we can't affect those. What we can do here at the state level, the two that I think we've already talked on housing is definitely one. You know, I was talking to some voters the other day. Her son and daughter-in-law were living with them, and they both had incomes, both graduated from college, and they've been looking for a year for somewhere to live. It all trickles down. Now, what we can do is get a hold on healthcare costs. You know, Medicaid, the state has done a really good job in backfilling all of those funds that we lost, but you know, that was a Band-Aid. We need to figure out a way to keep that going. Prescription drug costs, we've got RX kids here in the city, but let's make that statewide, let's make that permanent. And that getting those healthcare coverages will lower cost for everybody involved, for all of us who are participate in the healthcare system, which is pretty much everybody. You know, those are a couple of things I would want to, again, requires a multifaceted solution. We can't just cut taxes. We can't just, increase benefits. It needs to be a mix of everything. Again, it's connected with the housing and the healthcare. I think a lot of it is also in healthcare. We're talking about mental health care. And it's connected to the Medicaid money and prescription drugs getting cut off. And it is so interconnected everywhere. Other things that we can work on, maternal mortality. That is a really big issue, and it is often connected to lower economic status, but not always. We can make sure that has better visibility, more resources to look at it. There's other things that we can do too in terms of looking at jobs. Does this job really need a college degree or a high school degree, or can we use years of experience in lieu of having the degree? Finding ways, alternate ways to get as many people into the workforce who want to be there as possible. First and foremost is going to be to listen and be present. I've heard from many of our underrepresented communities that too many times the politicians show up 2 months before the election, want them to vote for them, and then take off. And I have committed myself to not do that over the last 4 years as I was preparing both to run for Congress and for this one. I'm going to be present in the areas, the important places to be, and not just present and preaching, present and listening, approaching it with some humility, understanding that these are going to be tough conversations, but that's the only way we can move forward through this, is to find the similarities between all of us. I really do believe there's more similarities than differences. And if we listen, if we take the time to listen and understand and care for our neighbors, then we can get their influence and their input in the big decisions that need to get made. It's not healthy. The state of our union is not strong. And I have a much more unique and in-depth perspective on this. My undergrad degree was political theory and constitutional democracy. I focused on not only what the founders wrote, but what the founders read and prepared them to write what they wrote. And as an attorney who's focused on constitutional law, I have studied this, as long as I can remember. And what's happening now is the opposite of what our founders wanted. The whole purpose of our country is that they were trying to get away from a king. They were trying to get away from established religion. If you read what they wrote, very few of them were church-going Christians, maybe John Adams. But most of them believed in a higher power, but they did not want to preach that to anybody else. And the other thing that our democracy requires that has been going down is appreciation of free and different speech. When I was at Western, I was WMU in their general counsel's office. I was the free speech expert, and I was able to hold a lot of free speech lessons and coffee hours and those sorts of things, and learned that young people just haven't learned the value of listening to people who disagree with them. It's hard, but that's how we all move forward, and that's how we all learn. And so we need to stop silencing each other, but still respecting each other. I mean, the main theory underlining all of free speech is just because you can doesn't mean you should. But if we want our republic to survive, people need to stand up and fight for it. I can understand where that feeling's coming from. I can see why people feel that way. I have been involved in civic government since I was in high school. The first time that I've knocked doors was because we had a millage in Grand Rapids Public Schools. They wanted to make us pay for sports. All I can say is, here in Michigan, you know, I did a lot of work, we all did a lot of work with Voters Not Politicians to make sure that your vote counts in this state, and to make sure that everybody has access to the vote. And the same as, okay, if one person leaves the light on, it really doesn't affect overall electric usage. But if 1 million people leave the light on individually, it affects significantly electric usage. It's the same way in the vote. I mean, a little bit you have to have faith in the system. And I can tell you, you know, as someone who has worked in and worked to solidify our system, you can believe and trust in our system here of voting in Michigan. A lot of other states are under attack, as we've seen. But it's, I guess all I can say is, if you want your voice heard, you need to vote. Because if you vote, somebody may or may not hear your voice. If you don't vote, they definitely will not hear your voice. I'm really excited to do this. I'm really excited to represent Kalamazoo in Lansing. You know, as many of you know, I did run for Congress, and for many different reasons, realized that this is just a better fit for me and for my family and for the community. Running for State House, I get to talk to voters. I get to be present, I get to listen, I get to see what it is that you want. Running for Congress was not at all like that. I was a rower, as mentioned before. Rowing is the ultimate team sport. You know, in college, you can't row a boat with one person. You can't row a boat with 7 people. You got to have all 8. Otherwise, you literally go around in circles. Legislating is the same thing. It is a team sport. Nobody can pass a law by themselves. And so I have spent the last 10 years with Voters Not Politicians here locally, across the state, across the country, building and developing relationships with folks from all across the political spectrum. And I now, as a representative for you, can build upon and pull from those relationships to make sure that we actually get work done. Because no matter what happens, I mean, it would be great if we take the trifecta, we take the House, we can get all of the incredible legislation we want passed through. But there's also a good chance that's not going to happen. So we need people who are going to be in Lansing who know how to have tough conversations and find a way to move us all forward as a state. And I really ask for your vote because I believe I'm the best person to do that here in Kalamazoo.